to. Okay, so we're going to talk about a technical approach to the license sync. I spent some time putting together a document for potential ways to approach this. And as I was going through it, there's a lot of decisions to be made. I've kind of picked a few just based on how I was leaning, but we can definitely change course at any time. There's ways that we can tackle this in terms of the end goal and how we envision it ending up. And there's also decisions to be made about how we break it up into smaller chunks for iteration. So I've made some kind of just choices along the way based on what I think might be a good strategy for breaking it up. But yeah, so let's talk through this. So first, I just want to review the mock-ups that were made from a little while ago. I think there are going to be some changes to those mock-ups, but they're still going to be good to look at just for discussing this. And then we can walk through the document I put together. And at the end, I just want to make sure that we've at least touched on some of these major topics that I had questions about. So first, let's talk about so the experience mapping that Tim Noah put together has kind of a rough outline of the user experience that we might see for the license sync. Anybody stop me along the way if you have any questions. I realize that not everybody has seen this probably. So if you have questions about it, please stop and we can talk about it. Okay, so the way that it would first start is through email. I mean, currently customers get emails whenever they purchase a subscription that has a license for self-managed. And so now we are talking about potentially the end goal would be that a customer could get an activation code instead of a license key file. And with that activation code that they're sent, they can copy that and the user can go to a new kind of subscription page instead of a license page in the admin section of the self-managed instance. If they choose the sync, you can just paste that activation code directly into the instance. That then makes a request to the customer's app for activation, and we can see it float over here. It makes some updates behind the scenes, which we'll talk about for syncing the license. The user's then sent to a congratulations page where they can see what they've signed up for, what they've activated, the plan, and so forth. They can then choose.
Tyler,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. Do you think maybe it would be good to share your screen, especially if we're recording this, just so that
Yes.
it's tough, I think, in Murel for us to kind of know exactly what screen you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let me do that.
Awesome, thanks.
So yes, we're talking about basically this page where you are on the admin area on the subscription page, and the person has entered their activation code they can activate. Then they're taken to a congratulations page. From here, they can choose to manage their subscription, which is basically the page they see from that point forward when they go to the subscription section of the admin area. They would see their subscription details that shows when they were last synced, and then whether or not they want to turn off the sync. And that's primarily the workflow for the automated sync. There was also some diagrams that Tim put together for the manual sync. We can choose to talk about this now. The way that I was thinking about it through the technical approach is that this could be done in a later iteration. I understand that manual syncing, this is going to be the solution for air gap customers, which is a large chunk of customers and not something we want to just gloss over. But we can iteratively tackle this and add it in later. Basically, my idea was that we could build the automated solution in a way that this ties in pretty easily into it, by just allowing the customer to do some of those manual steps that the automated solution is doing. So I think it could be tied in pretty easily in a later step.
Yeah, I agree, Tyler. I don't think that we want to solve for all of these cases to start. I think if we start with the, the user has internet case and build upon it, because I think we're going to have a long transition period of getting people off the old models as well. So we'll need to continue to support those. And to me, that can be a solution for these folks for some period of time. Ultimately, we want to get everyone off because it, closes some holes for abuse and other things. But I would be perfectly happy with a first iteration being focused solely on people who have internet access and are on an open network.
Right. We always have the original, license workflow that we currently have. So that's always the fallback, at least for the time being while we build this out. So with that in mind, let me jump to the document that we put together. Okay, so the technical approach, the license sync. I've broken this up into a few different workflows. First is activating a license. This is basically just going into detail about that, the process of signing up, basically getting the activation code, and then activating it through the self-managed instance, and the final screen for congratulations and like seeing the managed subscription page. Next is syncing a license. So this is like basically once you've activated, what are the processes involved with actually syncing from that point forward. And last is the transition for a legacy. So like if you already had an instance that had a license, had a legacy license, how do we want to transition those to this new sync process? So I figure we can just jump into the top one, activating a license sync. And again, please stop me if you have questions. I'll probably go through some of the, I won't talk about all these bullet points. We can just talk through the main ones, because there's a fair amount here. Okay, so my assumption was that when we have this, basically would have the licensing on by default for customers that don't have licenses already. So if you thought maybe new customers or customers that are just installing an instance, then this would be the kind of default workflow for them. They can always choose to opt out of it if they want, but that was my running assumption. And the purchase process for subscriptions would work the same as it as it does today, at least in the short term. We can choose to change that at a different time if we want. And that just makes things easier down the road, I think. All right, so next, the customer app will need to generate an activation code. So this is kind of what we talked about in the mapping. The way I was thinking about an activation code is it's basically just a key that associates basically the license to the subscription or to the self-managed instance. And these would need to be stored somewhere, probably in the database as tied to the subscription. Those aren't currently stored in the database. Those are kind of loosely stored in the database through an order. So we can talk about whether we want to store that in the database as a first-class citizen or tie into the order. I think those decisions could be made later, though. The license notification service that's currently in place, that is basically a service on the customer's app that sends a request to the license app to create the license and deliver an email to the user. We would need to just adjust that so that the license app no longer sends the email. We would want that email to come from the customer's app. And that's because we have, we basically don't want to send that legacy license to the customer from this point forward. We want to send that activation code. We still want a license to be created behind the scenes, because I think that would make things a lot easier if people want to opt out of the sync. The license would have created, and they can, you know, copy that old license and install it if they want. So let's see. We could also consider including the legacy license in the email as before. I'm not sure that this is necessary at this point, but it's kind of like a user experience question, I think. But yeah, we can always make those decisions later.
Yeah, my take on that, without knowing enough about it, would be to not do that, because I think we want to discourage people from opting out. We would rather them use licensing. So I think we need the ability to do it, but I don't think we want it to be overly prominent. You know, make it so that they have to opt out, and then I imagine that when they opt out in the UI, we would have some information there and maybe a link to the portal that says, okay, to install a license, you need to go to the portal and download license, like an FAQ, or to the actual portal. We have actually a way to deep link to a specific subscription now that the retention team just did and just shipped, so we may be able to leverage that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we have ways to do it without including the license in the emails, and I think it probably would be less confusing. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's it for step one. Step two, this is kind of this page in the instance where the user can paste in their activation code and choose to activate. Again, we're assuming that license sync is on by default, so that the user would see this page if they don't already have a legacy license or a synced license. Let's see. When the customer enters the activation code, it sends a request to the customer's app, which would be a new endpoint for the activation request to accept that. And at this point, well, I guess we can talk through this. Basically, there's an alternative approach I was thinking about that would take more effort up front. And it could be something we could add in later, but basically it's something where instead of doing an activation code approach, we could just have a way for users to basically pull in, like log into their the customer's app through the self-managed instance. And this kind of ties in with the authorization piece that the acquisition team is working on. But they could just see the list of subscriptions that they've purchased and select the one that they want to tie to this instance. So that's something that we could do. It's more effort up front, I think, but would be a better user experience probably. Okay, so next, when the activation request is received by the customer's app, it will find the subscription that matches that activation code. It will, I mean, we could potentially store some usage information at this point or wait for the next automated sync. I think, I mean, my gut instinct would be just to wait for the automated sync, but there could be a business reason to store usage up front. And create the authentication token at this point. Basically, my idea was for future requests, we could create auth tokens to make sure that they're, you know, secure communications, sync communications from that point forward. So we would create the auth token, and that would be included in the response back to the self-managed instance. You know, we could potentially wipe. Sure.
Acquisition team's also looking at that authentication token piece. I just added a comment and highlighted linking to where we're looking at that.
Okay.
I'll
give now,
like it is relevant, so I'll give you like a 10-second overview of it.
Sure.
We are basically looking at ways which a user can regain access into their self-hosted instance. So when they originally create a subscription and have the license applied, we'd also like to apply a authentication token to that self-hosted instance, which will allow the self-hosted instance to communicate with the customer's application on an ongoing basis. So basically allowing them to log in to the customer's app later on again in the future. In the first, if it's the first time a self-hosted instance has ever communicated with customers, we're thinking about not requiring authentication there to allow anyone to be able to create licenses. Or sorry, anyone to create subscriptions.
Right.
So I think we'll probably overlap on that one piece.
Okay, so that'll definitely be a good area to make sure that we're, in sync, no pun intended, on that work, so we can potentially reuse some of the same work that you're doing. I'll take a look at that in more detail, I guess, following this call as well. So thanks for linking that. Let's see. So at this point, we would, after we've made a tie from the subscription or from the activation code to the subscription, we could create a license key, and we can talk about this. Hold on, get someone here. Okay, so right at this point we can create our first synced license key, and this kind of depends on what we want to do. We could create it here, or we could wait and do that when they purchase. 2 points in time, I don't think it really matters a ton, but if we decide to generate this step, it would just mean that we would make a request to Zora, during the sync step to get the subscription details instead of during the call out. I think those are decisions we can make while we're probably in development, but just want to call it out. I think this actually might help us in some ways with the problems we have with the call out. If we ended up creating it on the fly, like during the sync, I think it might actually potentially you'd see some improvements. So just note that. So during the activation response, the response back from customers in the self-managed instance, basically it would just store the new synced license key into the licenses table that's already present in the EE instance or the self-managed instance. Basically, it's storing it to the database. And this would persist the authentication token as well for future requests if we wanted to go that route. And let's see, anything else to comment on that? Probably not. So this new idea of a synced license key is basically just like an augmented version of the license key that we currently have. So we could just build off of the existing license key and add some more attributes to it that indicate whether it's a license key. We could include some metadata about when it was synced. I'm not sure if we actually need a next sync if that's something that we want baked into the key itself, or just something that would just be part of the instance when the schedule, the cron job, or whatever it is that we're using to call out the syncs on a routine basis. I think probably this one's not necessary, but having the last sync that would be useful information. And one of the bigger things that I wanted to discuss was like whether we want to block changes. If someone is in a synced license but hasn't synced in a while for whatever reason, whether it's a network problem or they're blocked, do we want to block the license features from being used after a certain amount of time. I know with a normal license key, we have a grace period of 2 weeks. So we could potentially do a similar type of thing. If they have synced in 2 weeks, then we can block features, or just fall back to the current behavior, and that after the certain amount of time that they paid for, we could block them after 2 weeks from their yearly, let's say it's a year-long license, then after that year plus 2 weeks, and then we'd be blocked. The downside to that approach is that we wouldn't be able to revoke licenses very easily that way, unless we change the some of the logic within the license key. Say, like, I guess you could revoke them if you change the dates from the original block changes, but I didn't know if you want to separate the lifespan of the key from the lifespan of the sync. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. So that's up for debate.
Yeah, I think that we probably want to have some grace period, but I don't think we want to go too long. I think it's something, Amanda, you and I should talk about what we think probably works best. I think maybe a week or two is fine, but I do want to try to at least address the use cases where I can pay and get a refund and have GitLab for free for a year. So I think I don't think we want to go too long. So that's my take. But sorry, go ahead.
I think this could be
the other part of this. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was going to say, I think this could be done dynamically, as in maybe this this column can be set from the customer app, like as part of the sync. For things like you mentioned, like the refund and stuff, maybe we can just block them because we notice, that something like that happened. So then maybe we can act from our side and just update that in the next sync, so we can have some defaults or something, but then it would be nice to have like an override. Again, something we can iterate as well.
Yeah. Just a quick, just a quick consideration. I wonder if we should force a sync before any subsequent amendments to the activation code. Like if midterm they want to add additional users, we should probably force a sync before we do that to capture data.
Yeah, I think, sorry, Tyler, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts on when we would do that force sync. You're saying at certain points during their license, or after an event, like when they've added users?
Before an event, like adding users. So like in the process of adding on users, if the sync hasn't been in X period of time, do a refresh.
What's the thought behind that, Amanda? Is that because, I mean, I would think it'd be more important after, if we're not doing, like, if we go to a point where we're doing like prorated charges and regular true ups, I could see it making more sense. But
it would be just like the renewal cycle. If you allow them to add users without checking their usage, your key might not work. So if they have 30 active users on their system and they've only purchased 10 and they go to purchase 10 more, the key should fail, right? Because they're only putting 20 active in, but they have 30 active on the system. It would be like the renewal check. I'm assuming you're going to have a check before renewals. Yeah. I haven't said anything because we haven't gotten that far, but
yeah, for renewals,
it should be the same thing. Like take a usage check of the system before buying any add-ons to ensure the key covers the current active usage. Does that make sense?
Got it. So yeah, if it's like purchasing an add-on, but if they have 50 users in their license and they going from 20 to 30, then it wouldn't be as critical, right?
No, because then the assumption is they know what they're doing and they bought the right one, but most users don't know what they're doing.
Quick question before we go on while we have the interruption. I'm like tagging all these lines that I think are kind of standalone issues. Is this how you were thinking when you were breaking this work up, Tyler, or is this silly for me to continue doing this?
Yeah, I was thinking about certain bullet points as issues. I was definitely going to break them up, following this call. If we felt comfortable with a general approach like this, that was my idea. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so then I'll stop now. You can look at those if they're helpful, but I'll let you do that part afterwards because you know the right way to break it up. So I was just trying to get ahead of things, but
sure. Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool. So let's see, where were we? So we talked about block changes. Yeah, I'm assuming that we want to store the sync license keys in customer's app. And I don't think it's probably worthwhile to talk through the way we would store that here. Yeah, so obviously, since we're making changes to the GitLab license, which is its own repo and gem, that we would have to make changes to that. And, I don't even have access to that gem or that repo yet. So I would need to get some access there. And so we can kind of glide through these. The last 2 pages are pretty simple. It's a congratulations page and showing the subscription details. One important piece to talk about here is really the toggle for disabling the license sync, whether or not we want to opt out to the original workflow or to go back to the manual sync. But I think we kind of agreed that we would do the manual sync in a later iteration. So I think we have a good way forward on that one. Okay, so deactivating an instance, that's a link here, which would basically just delete the sync license and fall back to step 1. So like a sort of a reset.
Question about the deactivation.
Sure.
What does that do in terms of the historical information if they were to renew for that instance? Do you lose the data captured?
Well, I mean, I guess we could go a few different ways there. We could capture, like, keep the historical information and just kind of soft delete the types of things. Yeah, I hadn't thought through that. So if it's useful,
do we know what the use case is there? Like, how is that
deactivation?
Yeah, how is that different than like just turning the sync off? And what
Right.
what is the user problem that that's solving? Maybe it's a question for Tim.
Yeah, it could be a question for Tim. So right now, would be a difference. I mean, a subtle difference, because turning the sync off wouldn't fall back to the manual sync. Would actually fall back to like the original license workflow, whereas this would potentially keep that sync in place, but they just would remove the license from it. So they would
that would revert to core.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So that's the equivalent of deleting all of your licenses off your history today to revert to core. So a user would want to do that when they non-renew. That's how they get back to core. The problem is we lose all the data for renewals.
Well, and if the user just simply doesn't pay, wouldn't the sync ultimately put them back to core on its own? Like, why would someone want to do that prematurely?
So in today's model, not the sync model, but in today's model, your license doesn't get shut off, right? If you don't pay, so you have to physically remove it, and then you have to delete the entire history. If you've been with us for 3 years, you have to delete every single license in order to revert to core. If you just decide not to renew with us, your system will sit in read-only mode after the 14 days if you don't remove all those licenses. So you have to delete them all. I don't know if we're making a change to that functionality with the sync. If we are not, then I think that the deactivation here is the equivalent of deleting those licenses. But I just want to be careful that we don't lose the data we need if we give them a button to easily do it and they meant to renew. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I wonder if we should, as part of this, change it so that if the sync fails after 14 days, they can go back to core instead of read only. I'd want to understand more of that, the thought behind that, and the implications, and like, does read only make people reactivate more than if we just put them into core?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. But from a user perspective, that would be my preference. You know, don't make me do all these things to get back to core. If I don't have an active license and it's just sitting there, revert me to core.
Right, and that's kind of how .com is supposed to behave.
Exactly. Right, supposed.
So yeah, I think that's probably something for Amanda and Tim and myself to think through, but maybe that's some scope that we can cut, or maybe just shift to auto downgrade instead of them having to manually do this. Because I'm with you, man. I don't want to lose that data, and I feel like giving them a way to destroy that information is probably gonna not be ideal.
There's also the fact that we have, you know, all this information being synced to the customer's app that wouldn't have been normally. So we still have access to that data that's now in the customer's app for that. So that might help as well. Okay, so then I had a few like general questions about that, about this workflow. What happens when code is activated up front, but the instance is over the allotted amount? I assume that we'll just continue with the same behavior that's currently happening, but you know, maybe, I mean, this would be the time to change that if we wanted to.
Actually, in the current model, if they don't have a license on their instance and they have X number of users and they load a license that is less than X number of users, they don't get any of the entitlements of the license. It throws an error and they sit at core. So I would assume that activating a code for less users than are in the system,
okay,
if we're going to do the same thing, would error.
Right. That's my assumption, that we would just keep the same behavior there, but
okay.
But if we wanted to change something there, we can. This would be a good time to do it. Let's see, and then how we wanted to facilitate plan upgrades. So we didn't really show in the workflows. There's nothing really for like a clear path to upgrade. So probably need to work with Tim maybe to figure that out. I mean, obviously you could deactivate and then go and purchase something and then apply that new code and sync it that way, but that might not be clear to customers to go that route.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a perfect world, there's like a upgrade to premium, upgrade to ultimate button right in the instant.
Yeah.
I hit that, you're going to be charged this amount. Cool. Okay. And everything else happens, you know, automatically. Yeah. I think that would be the ideal. I'm sure there's a lot of work actually to make it seem that simple. But.
And in that case, Mike, you don't get a new activation code. It updates the same activation code on the back end, or?
Yeah, I would think that if I'm already synced, that's all I need to do. And then all the communication would happen automatically, unless I'm in the old license model. That's my opinion. I think we should loop in Tim and some other folks for their thoughts, but I want to have as few barriers to upgrades and growth as possible.
This kind of ties in with what I was saying before about how you select the subscription that you want to apply the license for. So like, instead of using activation codes altogether, we could have the self-managed instance basically log into the customer's app through an API, and it show a list of the subscriptions that you want to choose from. And so that would fit in nicely with this. So like, if you want to upgrade, you could just click the link, choose the one you want to upgrade to, and then it's at that point. So, or activated at that point. So investing upfront in that workflow might actually save us when we want to do things like this, or at least make it easier. Okay, so let's see. You had a couple questions here as well. Do you think let's see, thoughts on doing the same client versus server side? And I think someone brought that up in one of the earlier meetings. I have mostly just been thinking about this server side, but
I think
Might be
it makes
right.
more sense for cloud licensing to be server side. One of the things which we're doing on the acquisition team is we're trying to make the checkout flow completely in the self-hosted instance, so that a customer doesn't even need to leave their self-hosted instance. And we just communicate via API to the customer's application. So what that would look like would be a user goes to the pricing page in their self-hosted instance in their browser, and the browser, they go through the checkout flow, and they go through Zuora as well, payments, and we post all of that over to the customer's application. Customer's application sends us back a license, and within the form in the browser, we submit it to the backend. That's one of the flows which we're currently considering.
I mean, that it does sound nice. I guess I'd have to think through. I suppose it would be secure, using a similar type of auth strategy that we were talking about before.
Yeah, so in this case, there wouldn't be authentication in this case because you're just posting it over to the customer's application. Later on, when you actually need to sync, or when you actually need to log back into the customer's application to make any changes, then that's where you would pass a token.
Yeah, that's interesting. Not up front. Yeah, you did mention that before. Okay.
Yeah, but just some ideas which we're looking at on the acquisition side, because we're trying to optimize for the checkout flow, the conversion rates there, and our fear is that if we do it server side, a lot of these instances will be firewalled to not allow certain calls. But if we do it client side, it shouldn't be as big of an issue. That said, if it is blocked both client and server side, then we've got that fallback, which is what you've described above.
Okay. Cool. Let's see. So, yeah. So you mentioned about aligning the work with the acquisition team.
I guess the only other part to mention here is, so creating a subscription doesn't require authentication. After that subscription is created, then the token is applied to the self-hosted instance, which allows you to log back into the customer's application. If that self-hosted instance ever was turned off, or maybe someone deleted that token or the license was deleted, we still have their email in the customer's application where we can send a password reset link or send a magic link, which allows them access back into the customer's app, which is currently how it works. Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Let's see, Amanda, do you have a few questions here as well?
Yeah, so just, and I kind of brought these up a little bit, and they don't have to be answered right now, but just questions. So regarding renewal workflow, a hot topic right now is how will we handle people who are renewing early? So if they're due to renew, 45 days from now, but they renew and pay the subscription today, will they receive the activation code immediately? If yes, and they apply it early, what will happen? Will entitlements become available early, or will the system enforce a start date of the entitlements? Ideally, it's the latter. And then also the thing that I hinted at earlier, we need to force a sync prior to renewing the subscription so that that activation code is generated with the proper details, right? Taking a measure of how many true ups are available or required rather, and how many active are required to make sure that when they purchase the renewal, they're buying the right amounts.
Okay. Yeah, so we're getting close to time here. I don't know if we'll have any extra time, but we're definitely not going to get to these other workflows yet. I can arrange another meeting to continue this if it's useful, or if folks want to look at it offline on their own time, that's an option as well. Are there
For
any
me
red
personally,
flags?
I found this to be super, super helpful. Like I was looking through the doc, but I think talking through it as a team is, for me, I get a much more complete picture of everything to do. So I'd love to have another session if we can. I mean, I think in the meantime, like let's all dig into the doc as much as we can and prepare. But I personally got a lot out of this session. I really appreciate you setting it up and leading it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I enjoy that as well. I think the collaboration is nice. It's tough to go off in like isolation and work on this for a while. So it was nice to get some feedback. So I'll arrange another meeting maybe later this week. I'll look at calendars and see what works best for folks. Yeah, so just be on the lookout for that. And I'll cut it off here so that, I'll be mindful of everybody's time, but appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Tyler.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks,
This was
Tyler.
awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Tyler.
All right.
Thanks, Tyler.
Bye-bye.
No problem. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right.